Okay, so I've actually got a couple of videos that I was going to put out today that I'm not going to put out. They're about Corbynism and anti-Semitism, and I'm going to leave them till tomorrow. Because yesterday there was a thread on Mumsnet about the Nspcc, and I didn't really comment, and I hadn't done a video about the Nspcc, generally because my position on the Nspcc and Bernardo's and the big charities is that I fucking despise them. I think the Nspcc, so I'm being straight up before I start this. Before I go into it, I'm being very clear with you that I have always felt like this about the Nspcc. So I'm going to tell you about the Nspcc. The Nspcc have a legacy identity that comes from their original purpose as a pre-social work charity. This is pre-legal rights, pre-recognition of mothers, pre-women having the ability to leave violence, and they were called the Pity League. And they have primarily been, in their lifetime, a charity who are very middle class and who have generated falsehoods throughout my entire life about rescuing children, as if you can just rescue children and take them out of a context of their family and their life. And somehow that's better because the middle class isn't much better for children than poor women. And they have always been blind to domestic abuse. They have always been blind to the role of mothers in protecting children. They have always sought to undermine motherhood. They are a disgusting charity. I'm sorry. And they appear to be not. They appear to be about rescuing the children. So, one of the early... I didn't like the Nspcc because I had had an Nspcc worker when I was very, very young. And she was a fucking snotty old bitch. And she basically, at a period in time where the opposite was needed, was fucking, you know, I now realise why my mother was scared of these people. And I look back and I think, you fucking can. That's how I feel about the Nspcc. But that's not what actually shaped my perception of them. So, I'm trying to think. The first time I knew that they had grown a lot, but I was only a kid and then a teenager, and it wasn't really, I'm not sure if I was a social worker or if I was about to be a social worker. And they had an advert which was a cartoon of a child being battered around a fucking house. And even for me, as an adult, this cartoon was triggering. And I watched this fucking advert that kept coming up, and it was all about their fundraising, and I think about 85p out of every pound, I don't know, that's not fact-checked, by the way, I haven't researched that, that's off the top of my head, goes to administrative and salaries for very middle-class people who do no good at all. And this advert, to put it bluntly, like, I know, I talked quite a lot in the last year about PTSD, probably more than I have in my entire life, but, this advert triggered me as an adult. And I remember watching this advert and just thinking, you fucking cunts. And so for them to raise money for these fat salaries, they had made an advert which they ran for ages and ages and ages, which would trigger both children living within that situation and adult survivors of. And I knew that because it had actually fucking triggered me. And when I say triggered, I don't mean like SJW triggered. I mean that advert would come on and I would have a very actual physical reaction to it, and I would have to leave the room. And this is an adult. And it was all about making money. And then when I started working as a social worker, I found out what the Nspcc and Bernardo's were. And what they have been is like shop fronts for privatisation. So services get tendered out, and then the big massive conglomerate charities, the big Nspcc, the NCH, Bernardo's, they hoover up these contracts. And they spend all their money on expensive workers, usually very middle class workers who fit with their culture, who have no understanding. Let me be clear, the Nspcc have no understanding of child protection. None. They are a fucking disgrace. But once the Nspcc have got a contract, you'll get media comment off them. You can fucking, if you're a newspaper, you'll ring the fucking Nspcc and they'll have a statement out to you within a fucking hour. You need work for a child. There'll be forms, and they're very, very good at massively complex referral procedures, massively tight referral guidelines. And what this means as a social worker is because they've got the contract You don't have another service provider, you have to use their service, and you have a family where you are responsible for the oversight of legal responsibilities of this family who need the service. The service is there, the families is there. Trying to get them to give a fucking service is damn near impossible, and what you get instead is 3-6 months of fucking referral procedures where they go, oh, well, it doesn't quite fit. And they provide shiny branding for all the offices, all their posters have got Nspcc and everybody trusts it. But basically, when you see that the Nspcc or Bernardo's have picked up a contract, what that means is there is no service. That's what the Nspcc means. It means there is no service. If the Nspcc have won that contract, it means that there is no service. That's another service that the local authority has lost. That's another service that the social workers don't have. It's another bunch of money that children are not getting anywhere near in resources. So I was a lot less surprised by the Nspcc and their complete promotion of abandoning safeguarding, because they don't give a fuck about girls, and they don't give a fuck about women, and what they are is a charity who are concerned with, they are one of the main beneficiaries of privatisation. They are not a charity. The word charity implies, you know, an organic, and I really have a huge, like, we need charities. Charity is a very, very, small charities are a very, very good way of services emerging organically. So something might be set up as an organisation in a local area and it might grow and and this is actually a really good, I believe firmly that the voluntary sector is needed, that it can kind of fill the crevices that other people cannot fill, and it's really, really, really vitally important that we looked after our voluntary sector. But within our voluntary sector there are organisations who are from the ground up, who are, you know, often service user led charities, are really vital. The Nspcc are not that. The Nspcc are the Coca-Cola of these charities, and they are a fucking parasite. So I'm sorry I'm not mincing my words. To the Nspcc, safeguarding is not a concern. It's just not. That's not what they do. That's not what they consider. They're like G4S or Capita. And when you see the Nspcc posters, what that means is that's another service that's gone, because they're not providing it. And what instead they provide is an industry for very well paid middle class professionals. There were 2 social workers on my course who were there to train to go to the Nspcc, and they were absolutely clear throughout their fucking time that they were not, that would not be their role, because they don't have to think of the nitty gritty, they don't have to think about the reality of what happens when they have denied a service. They are just there to hoover up contracts and to provide facier and branding so that local authorities can say that we provided a service when no such service exists. And the same goes, like Bernardo's streets and lanes for the entire time in Bradford. I remember very specifically one meeting where we were literally sat in a team meeting, which happened very regularly in children's services offices. The whole team communicates all the time. And there were me and 2 other workers, and we were saying, you know, we now have, I mean, we both had half a caseload of girls who desperately, desperately needed just a worker who could befriend them, who could work with them. They didn't need to be particularly skilled, but they needed somebody who would see them a couple of times a week, check that they were okay, build a relationship with them, and we did not have capacity. We just did not. There was no way that we could do the work that these girls needed. What they needed was someone they trusted and could build a relationship with over time. And basically Streets and Lanes by Bernardo's had the contract, and you could not get a service from Streets and Lanes at all in this period. And we sat at this team meeting with a woman called Cass Tunstall, who was, I think she was a director of the service at that time. Was that her name, Tunstall? And we said, we need a service. Everybody knows Streets and Lanes are not providing it. And the whole office was in agreement. We all knew that Streets and Lanes were not providing it. And she said, well, we can't until we can review the service level agreement. When can we review the service level agreement? And she gave us a date, which was like a long time away. So what are the processes involved in us registering our concerns to review the service level agreement? Oh, you won't be involved, but we'll register your concerns. Oh, fucking will you? No, it's commissioning. So I'm not at all surprised by the NSPC's stance on this. The NSPCC have systematically benefited, encouraged, promoted the fracturing down and the breaking up of our child protection services so that they can benefit. And the only service the NSPCC provide is to their own workers, who they pay very fat salaries to. They don't hire working class women like me, or they try not to. They like you to be culturally right, which is culturally wrong for these families. So I'm not going to put out my video about Corbyn today. I've got two, one to Kath Weiner and one about Jeremy Corbyn and anti-Semitism. But I'm going to put this one out instead, because that's basically the way that I feel about the NSPCC. And what happened yesterday on Mumsnet, I think you should all go and have a look at the Mumsnet thread, the Facebook Q&A for the NSPCC, where they thought they were going to go and get asked about what's your biscuits, and instead these women said, actually, what about your undermining of safeguarding? They were like, oh well, we don't discuss safeguarding. There's also acknowledgement in that thread that the NSPCC know that gender identity is about undermining safeguarding, and they don't give a fuck.